Lead Time is a podcast of the Unite Leadership Collective, hosted by Tim Allman and Jack Caliberg. Lead Time taps into biblical wisdom for practical solutions to today's burning issues. Each podcast confronts real-time struggles facing the local church in a post-Christian culture. Step into the action with the ULC at uniteleadership.org. This is Lead Time.
Welcome to Lead Time. Tim Allman here with Jack Caliberg, and today we have the special privilege of having one of my favorite people on planet Earth, Jeff Skopak. I say that about a number of people, Skopak, but I really mean it with you. I really mean it, Jeff. You are a joy. Born and raised in central New Jersey. Pastor Jeff is a graduate of Concordia College in Bronxville, New York, Concordia Seminary, St. Louis, graduate of the PLI, Pastoral Leadership Institute, and holds a Doctorate of Ministry from Concordia Seminary there in St. Louis. He's served congregations in New York, New Jersey. So as you hear, he's a straight shooter. Arizona, and currently serve at Grace Lutheran Church and School in Jacksonville, Florida. Pastor Jeff is a guest instructor at Concordia Theological Seminary in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Can't wait to be a part of Friends of the Fort here in just a couple of months. We're recording in February. That takes place in April. That'll be a lot of fun. And he's teaching there at Concordia Theological Seminary, strategic planning and task management. Pastor Jeff is married to Amy, and they have two kids, Madelyn and Dillon, Briggs of Tucson, Arizona, and Jarod Skopak, who lives in Manhattan. And final thing is Pastor Jeff has a heart for the divine mandate of Matthew 25 and the Great Commission of Matthew 28, and is the author of Christ, Culture, and Cinema. This is from CPH, Concordia Publishing House, How Faith and Films Intersect, and therefore he has a weekly podcast called Christ, Culture, and Cinema, where he talks about theology connected to pop culture and movies that are coming out. Highly recommended. I've checked it out a number of times. You are in for a treat today. Buckle up. This is Jeff Skopak. So Jeff, let's dig right into the topic of the day. Now, I don't know when, listener, you're taking this in, but in late January, we had a bit of a conversation in the interwebs that took place over the large catechism that came out. And you got to see the church behaving in what I would say are inappropriate ways. A lot of times we talk about context. I remember taking a hermeneutics class there, Jeff, and understanding that context really, really matters. And it appears as if a lot of words were taken out of context as folks really, really came down on President Harrison and others who were a part of that publication. And it's since been put back on the shelves, and off we go. I actually got a copy in the mail on the way right now of the new large catechism. So what was your reflections on that non-churchly way in which many online behaved, Jeff?
Well, holy cow, how the floodgates opened and the boorish behaviors just poured forth. I was stunned, to be honest with you. The annotated large catechism was a more than 3-year work in production, overseen by the Commission on Theology and Church Relations, which really is representative of the top theologians of our church body brought together, overseeing exactly what it says it's supposed to oversee, theology and our relations with other church bodies. This particular work employed some of the most significant or principal theologians in the church to write about, to annotate, to add essays on how do we apply Lutheran theology to our current context. It's kind of like what my book is about. How do we read our theology into our culture today? How does it interact with it? This was an amazing task, and it went through not a single theological review, but it really went through triple theological review, which is unheard of in our Missouri Synod context. Typically, you write a book like when I wrote mine, and it goes to doctrinal review. There's a blind reader or readers, and they will then make note, comment, etc. Things are fixed before it's published. This particular publication went through theological review with the Commission on Theology and Church Relations. By default, it also went through the president's office, President Harrison, Vice President Lang, because they're ex officio to CTCR. And then they decided we should throw it through another theological review. So it went through a normal doctrinal review process. What happens? Armchair theologians start lobbing bombs without really digging deep enough. That's my estimation on the whole thing. And what troubled me most of all was the personal attacks on the editors, on the ones who oversaw the project. It was bad. It really represented the very worst the church could represent to herself and to the world.
Jeff, could you elaborate a little bit more on what the nature of this controversy is? I've heard words being flung around like that it's gone woke, that it's I think it's just like a lot of whiplash going around, a lot of reactionary stuff. And from what I'm understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, they're talking about maybe the reality of certain things that are happening in culture and saying this is how we apply theology into culture, not saying that we're taking culture and applying it to theology. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, it's twofold. On one hand, one of the attacks that really was pretty vociferous on this book was with regards to one of the authors who is not of the tribe of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, Dr. Paulson. He comes from the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, and ergo, by default, if you come from there, you must be bad, which is not the case at all.
No. I'm familiar with Paulson. He's a phenomenal theologian. So
yeah. So problem number one. I mean, you can't just throw out an article because the person isn't in our tribe. And let's face it, I know, Tim, when you were at seminary, I was at seminary. We read a lot of stuff that were from people not in our tribe. That is incredibly beneficial. That is enriching and enlivening to our theological faith. The one they love to throw out there these days is Herman Sasse. He was never in our tribe, guys. I mean, and they quote him all the time. So problem number one. The second problem, they went after specific articles that they in turn said were representative of wokeism, of critical race theory, and the like. And the thing that really troubled me is the authors that they were attacking for the most part were not white Anglo authors. They represented South America, Asia, etc. They were some of the authors of different ethnicities within our church body. That really troubled me a great deal. As you mentioned, I grew up in central New Jersey. I'm kind of a New Yorker in heart and mind. I grew up in a cultural mix. Man, that drives me nuts. Really, really bothered me. And as you saw the bad behaviors unfold and dug deeper, you saw some prevailing racism bubbling to the top, which really represented the worst of the worst that a churchman could ever say.
Very, very difficult. Let's get positive.
Yeah,
love, we could hang here for a while, but I love being a Lutheran, and, most of the time, because of the culture and all the beauty of so many different leaders and a number of different churches and institutions, et cetera, so many delightful people, faithful to the scripture and honor our Lutheran heritage, but also, desire, just like the Apostle Paul, to see the way the culture is regressing away from the things of Christ and say, hey, we can contextualize and not compromise the gospel of Jesus Christ today. So what do you love most, Jeff, about being a Lutheran?
Yeah, one of the great joys we have here in Jacksonville is we have a school, pre-K through 8th grade. And, we're in a context in Northeast Florida where we're kind of the belt loop on the Bible Belt, so to speak. But that isn't saying much in today's America, to be sure. So we have a variety of folk who utilize our school because of the challenges in the public school, in some of the charter schools, fill in the blanks. They find their way to grace. And what I'm often surprised by is when a parent will ask, so what are you going to teach my kid about faith? What are you going to do? So we keep on hand here, I swear by the caseload, small catechisms. And we give that out very freely to everyone. And it's amazing when parents come back and they go, hey, that's pretty good. That's really good stuff. Yeah. As they're going through Luther's explanations, as they're looking at, what actually is baptism, what is confession and absolution. And it resonates with them that this really matters today, that this has an important word in their lives at the moment. And Lutheranism has that, this beautiful liberation of justification by grace through faith, that we have this important message to share with the world, not to box it up and hide it behind high walls. And for us, because of our school, we have this open door into our community, and we're constantly sharing it out there with people. We're pushing out the best of our theological thinking and sharing it with kids, with parents, with grandparents. I love that about our theology. It's simple, it's direct, and it's sound when it rests upon the Scripture. What more could you want?
Exactly. Unfortunately, we live in a day and age where certain words and certain caricatures get made of one another. Words such as the Missio Dei, or even the mission, and then missional churches, and we kind of bifurcate, separate the confession and the mission, and they're obviously radically intertwined. You cannot be a Lutheran apart from the recognition, I'd say just a biblical Christian, apart from the recognition of the wider work of God from creation all the way to recreation. So how do you intersect, as a theologian, Jeff, the Missio Dei to good Lutheran teaching?
So one of the challenges we have in the church today, and I would say it's very, very strong within the Missouri Synod, is we have kind of devolved into tribalism. And in that tribalism, we kind of belong to a particular club or tribe. So you get pigeonholed as you're a missional guy, you're a big church guy, you're a school guy, you're a high church liturgy guy, etc. And that all fails to look at the broader picture that the Scriptures paint for us of what the church ought to be. The church is to be about the Missio Dei. It is to be about the mission of God. It's why I always kind of tie the two together, the Great Mandate along with the Great Commission. We're called to be a people in service, in work, in the community, amongst the needy. There was a professor back in the day when I was at seminary, Dan Picorni, and he used to say, it is about ministry to the littlest, the lost, the weak, and the dying. That's everybody, by the way. And that's where ministry happens. The mission goes to those people. We're to be about that. Now, in some contexts, a higher liturgical framework of worship may be the right thing to do. In other contexts, it may be something much simpler and dressed down. While in other places, there may be an incredibly intellectualized approach to Bible study, while in others, it's going to be way more rolling up your sleeves in hand service to people in the community or around the world. It's going to be different because God's people are different in each place. The uniting thread of the gospel is what brings everyone together. I mean, and we don't act that way. We don't act as if we're all on the same team. You'll hear me say this all the time. We're all on the same stinking team. Right. So let's act that way. It's okay if you're doing things differently and I'm doing things a little differently, so long as our word and sacrament ministry is aligned theologically.
So Jeff, I've heard probably the most glaring way that I personally see as I would use the term false dichotomy is the false dichotomy of confessional and missional. To me, it always seems like if you are truly confessional, it should lead you to be very missional. You would want the gospel proclaimed to as many people as possible. But what does that come from? Like, how does that develop, this idea that a person could see themselves as one or the other, right? I mean, I'm trying to get my head wrapped around that. I've never really heard somebody who holds that position articulate it very well of why they would be suspicious of having a very passionate missional view.
So I would tell you, for us, at least within our Lutheran tribalism, there are obviously different clans, and we have been affected by various cultures that emigrated to this country and brought with them their distinct cultural understanding of the Lutheran faith. What entered into the Missouri Synod, and it's a later edition, which is kind of interesting. We were a German church body, for sure, up and through about the late 1950s. But then there began a little seep into the Missouri Synod from what was at the time known as the Little Norwegian Synod. The Little Norwegian Synod, which, oh, by the way, today is still around as the ELS, or Evangelical Lutheran Synod. They were very much of getting things right, the kind of the truth and purity, get it right, and be suspicious of those who are not in lockstep alignment with how you say it, how you do it, how you express it. That came into the Synod in the 1960s. Well, I won't bore you with a history lesson, but it ultimately would lead down to a road of a very divided synod, which since 1974 has continued to fracture into what I would tell you are micro tribes. Used to be kind of two tribes in the Missouri Synod. There isn't anymore. There are micro tribes. And as you start to talk to folks across the spectrum of these tribes, which, Tim, you know, that's what I do. It's how I ended up doing Friends of the Fort, because although I have no connection to the Fort Wayne Seminary academically, they're one of us. They're part of me. I'm part of them. Yes. So we need to know each other. And that's been an incredibly valuable ministry to just go and appreciate people working, training, forming future pastors and deacons for the church. But really, it was about getting into their tribe, getting to understand the Fort Wayne tribe. I love the Fort Wayne tribe now. It's, I keep telling them they got to adopt me or something because I have no official connection to them. But it is that tribalism. So when all of a sudden you are of a tribe that says we are quote unquote confessional, in some respects it's insulting because, say, Tim is not a part of that tribe. But Tim's one of the more confessional guys I know. I know others who can not only quote the confessions, but they live the confessions. They teach the confessions. And that's the insult. To say that they're not missional, well, I don't know. Some of those guys really are. Their churches are doing some great things in their community. We got to get rid of the, call it what it is, the banners, the headings, the titles, and start working towards collaboration and appreciation of what each other is doing.
Yes. Yeah, labels are lazy. And I don't even like throwing out the label, but that's really helpful history. So go a little deeper in your connection to the seminary there in Fort Wayne, Concordia Theological Seminary in Fort Wayne. My dad's a graduate of there back in '82. I was born on Vic Ridge when he was there. And the reason he chose that actually because Concordia Seminary there in St. Louis was still kind of licking her wounds and rebuilding her faculty post Seminex and the walkout and such. Fascinating history. So is there a connection to that Norwegian Lutheran kind of theological approach at the seminary? Is that kind of how it started to go down that path? I didn't know about that, Jeff.
Yeah. So a couple of good books to look at. Most notably would be a book. It was written by an author who worked for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. And it was called, the book title is called The Preuss of Missouri. If you could ever find a copy of it, grab a copy of it. But it talks about when the Preuss family came into the Missouri Synod. They were they were actually unaffiliated. Everybody knows that Robert and Jack Preuss II the former president of the synod, they came into the Missouri Synod in the 60s. They know that their dad was the governor of Minnesota. Mm-hmm. What most don't realize is he was one of the founders of Lutheran Brotherhood, one of the preceding companies to Thrivent Financial for Lutherans. Mm-hmm. He was an unaffiliated Lutheran. It was his sons who would end up joining the Little Norwegian Synod and then eventually migrate over into the Missouri Synod in the 60s. And this is what's fascinating. Jack II would migrate over. Both would end up being professors in the seminaries. And in less than a decade, Jack went from joining the Missouri Synod to being the president of it at the convention in, 1968 when he beat Oliver Harms. But that brought that Norwegian kind of sectarian understanding of build the walls higher to protect the purity there within. That's very much what I get from that time frame. And then consider Robert ends up being the president at the Fort Wayne Seminary. So, that sent that down a different track. Secondly, the Fort Wayne Seminary, which was the practical seminary for forever and a day, they changed the curriculum. And once they changed the curriculum, it became a mirror image of the St. Louis Seminary. So now they're competing for the same students. So you have to create a distinctiveness when you're recruiting from the same pool of people. And that wasn't the case up until they changed the curriculum.
Wow. This is kind of interesting. I'm a Norwegian background, I was actually born there. And one of the things I had come to know about the Norwegian Lutheran Church is that they had a very strong piety movement there. Mm-hmm. And I wonder how much that may be an influence.
Oh, absolutely. And nowadays we see what the current iterations of it is with kind of this high church liturgical structure. But that wasn't the case, for example, when I was in seminary, 1988 to 1992. Fort Wayne was known more as the, lack of a better word, pietistic place over and against St. Louis. I'm not saying they were pietists by any stretch, but that was the kind of impression. Now, the strain of this kind of hyper liturgical framework of worship and expression, that comes much later on. That comes, post 9/11. So you're talking the early 2000s. And that's now, definitely benchmarked in both seminaries. So you go to either seminary, that's how the liturgical chapel practice looks every day. It's very structured, very higher church than most congregations practice in synod.
Jeff, the Constitution and the bylaws of synod about as well as anybody I've ever met, and that is a compliment. So, would you talk a little bit more about how we've made some bylaws have been put in place to say that, and I've heard this from various leaders in the synodical office, that we have agreed in our Constitution and bylaws to both theology and practice. And I remember being at the seminary and hearing a lot about this intertwining, interconnectedness. You cannot contextualize even practice. We need to remain in lockstep. And I remember hearing, if you go to a Lutheran church, you should be able to step in, and page 5 and 15, you can enter right in. And so that really kind of narrowed us down to say, if there are different people groups, different practices nationally and internationally, we got to make sure it's by the book. So how did we get to that place of talking about, because I will agree 100% on theology, the scriptures and the confessions, but yet it's going to look different based on the culture group that we take that word and sacrament to. Say more about the origin of aligning ourselves around theology and practice.
Yeah, so the theological alignment has always been very much the cornerstone of the Missouri Synod as a denomination. We go back to the early days with Walther, the congregations and groups that formed the church body. It was all about theology. It really and truly was. It was we agree in the inerrancy of the Word of God. We agree in the confessions, but there were different practices for sure when it came to worship expression, church governance, fill in all the blanks. I mean, they were different. Where it creeps in, and I think Larry Rast at the Fort Wayne Seminary would be a better guy to ask the question to, but my sense is when they started to work on unified worship materials, i.e. hymn books together. There's a professor used to be at the St. Louis Seminary, the late Wayne Schmidt. He was a Wisconsin Synod guy, came to Missouri, taught worship at Concordia Seminary, St. Louis. And he had his little line was, when Lutherans work on hymn books together, we merge, which is a truth. Or we align tightly. So when we talk about the hymnal of, for example, the TLH of 1941, that particular hymn book, go look in the front. It was the old Synodical Conference. We were very aligned. We didn't merge, but we were aligned with doing ministry with Wisconsin, the Evangelical Lutheran Synod, and oh, by the way, the Slovak Evangelical Lutheran Church, which would merge with the Missouri Synod as a non-geographic district. Fast forward, if you were to get the old Lutheran Book of Worship that was published in 1978, we were the ones who started that project down the track, the Missouri Synod. We started it in the mid-1960s. That project was rolling down the hill. We're the ones who pulled out of it. But if you were to grab the Lutheran Book of Worship, you're going to see the Missouri Synod is in the front cover. We're listed there. So I would tell you that over the years, as we continue to narrow our faith expression by means of specific forms of worship, hymn book production becomes a critical piece of the puzzle. Now we start talking about cultural venues. Now, I know you're out there in Arizona. I used to be in Arizona. Some of that is not going to resonate with some of the cultural groups in and around you. You know, I'm here in Florida. I've got a very different culture now in Jacksonville, Florida. Go down to Miami, it's an entirely different culture. The notion that we have to all be on the same page with the same music, with the same, that isn't how we've ever done it. But over the last 100 years, we've been moving in that direction. For better or for worse, that's where we are. What I found fascinating is they've been working on, I guess, the translation of the Lutheran Service book for the Lutheran Church, and I want to say it's in Ghana. I want you to think of the kind of the European expression of faith in that hymnal in Ghana. So the reason I say this is because we're kind of confusing, and I think we're confusing an expression of faith with regards to the faith itself. And that may be splitting hairs a little bit. There's a wonderful book written by a Japanese author. His last name is Endo. It's called Silence. Martin Scorsese did the movie version of this in 2016. And it's really about the last Roman Catholic priest on the island of Japan during the intense persecution. And the reason I bring this up is one of the challenges in that movie was the expression of faith. Were the people truly faithful, or were they faithful to the things of the expression of faith, the objects, the cross, the picture of Mary, so on and so on? Or were they genuinely faithful? And that's kind of the question the reader as well as the moviegoer has to answer. That's kind of the question we run into is we may know the forms, but are we intimate with the faith that is behind the forms would be my challenge question for us as we move forward.
And as you look at the book of Acts, Jeff, I mean, from the covenant of circumcision to Peter's call to eat meat, a number of these respective cultural forms were we were given freedom in how they were expressed, all for the sake of carrying the gospel to diverse people groups. That's a major part of why the church in Acts grew. And I believe in a post-Christian secular culture, it's going to be those of us who remain true to the faith, centered in the person and work of Jesus, and then will hold the forms with an open hand so that the Holy Spirit, the book of Acts is all about the work of the Holy Spirit, that the Holy Spirit in community, connected to the never-changing Word of God, can give us wisdom in how to steward those forms well and not compromise the faith at all. Anything else to add to that?
Yeah, no, and I would tell you the thing that we need to be, mindful of as we go forward and are embracing different ways in which to connect people to Jesus is always being mindful of the contextualization of what it is we're doing. Yes. Because there are many things in culture which are God-given, God-breathed, God-blessed that we can certainly use. And then there are other things that are antithetical and are, either prohibitive of use or are going to diminish the gospel expression. So to me, there's always that fine line we need to be very mindful of. And that's good. I mean, God gave us our brains and our capacity to discern these things and community to figure it out.
Well, I'm even thinking of like the form of worship that Luther put together. He kept as much familiarity for people as possible while removing the parts that he knew were theologically problematic. And that was done for the benefit of the people so that they could have a familiar experience, right?
Yeah, most certainly. Mm-hmm. Most certainly. To this day, I grew up, like, you mentioned earlier, in central New Jersey. My father was Roman Catholic, converted to Lutheranism. The expression of the Lutheran faith in those churches in that metropolitan New York area is very Roman. It just is. It's what I grew up with. I understand it. And as, what I would tell you are the disenfranchised Roman Catholics of the metropolitan New York area would find their way to these Lutheran churches. There was a comfort. There was a familiarity. But the objectional pieces were removed. So I think that's a great point, Jack.
Yeah.
Jeff, how does this interact with the conversation around leadership development and namely pastoral formation today? I think we've fallen in love with the institutional form of developing leaders for the mission of God. And I think it's good. I think a new day is here where we need to explore diverse forms while not compromising our theological integrity. And the technological revolution today, I mean, things have radically changed, and the way people receive content has radically changed. It's not so much about content, it's about appropriate content curation. So, we're exploring different forms of leadership development here. And I would love, as one who's intimately connected at both of our seminaries, to hear your take on how we could have more of a seminary type experience, especially for a number of our second career bivocational leaders. And at the same time, I believe in partnership with our seminaries, boost the brand of both of our seminaries as well. There's a collaborative form that could be taking shape in a post-Christian secular America. What are your thoughts, Jeff?
Yeah, that is an absolutely wonderful question and kind of the softball to the guy who hangs out at both seminaries. I would tell you I drive them crazy a little bit because I'm constantly challenging them that the current model that we have been using, which is a very academic, very trackable model by degree, is dying and or dead. We haven't had the funeral yet. We're currently funding, and not funding through synod, but funding through fundraising and the like, to seminaries to do the exact same thing that are shells of what they used to be. I was on the St. Louis campus just a couple of weeks ago for the Faith and Film Festival, and to walk around the campus, it was empty. There was nobody there. Now, they were on a midwinter break or what have you, but I couldn't even get into the library. It was locked up, and that's something that's typically open. Now, I share that because the great plight of the church at the moment is we're running out of leaders. We're running out of pastors. We're running out of deacons and deaconesses and deacons and fill in all the blanks. We're just running out. we're not the only ones with this unique problem, because if we're looking at it from as our church is contracting, we're running out of leaders. Now we can just go overseas to Makaniezu. They're having the exact same problem, but for different reasons. Their growth is exponential, and they don't have enough bodies to keep up with the pastoral role that is necessary in serving this rapidly growing group of Christians over in Africa. Now, having said that, technology is not something for us to be fearful of. We use it all the time. We're using it right now. The church uses it. I mean, Lord knows through COVID, we all figured out how to use Zoom and other technological resources to bring the word of God to our people. So that is not, to me, the issue. The issue is control. Mm-hmm. Content, control, community. Take those words. So to me, I have no problems with our seminaries being the overseers of content. That's what they're there for. That's why we've got these people. They're brilliant. I'm telling you, you go on either seminary campus, I am just amazed at the humility of the faculty and the brilliance they possess. So I have no problems with the content. The control, to me, is something that it's okay for online education. My son is a perfect example. He was in the United States Coast Guard. He had gone to a couple of different schools, didn't know what he wanted to do. He ended up going into the Coast Guard, did a tour in the Coast Guard, finished his college degree online at West Virginia University without ever stepping in the state of West Virginia. Mm-hmm. Never went, never stepped, never had been. He chose West Virginia because they were military friendly, and my brother, his uncle, is a graduate of there. So he got a big alumni scholarship thing as well. Now he gets his college degree. Now he's looking, he lives in Midtown Manhattan. He's looking at working on his MBA at Columbia or at NYU. This shows you the difference. Here are two major universities. Most people know Columbia or NYU. Columbia's program is all online. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, Columbia wants you to physically be in the classroom. So NYU says, yeah, we can figure this out. We can do it online. Columbia, older institution, they want to still have control. To me, when you have online, that's always the fear. We're losing some control. Even SMP still has that component. You must go to the seminary and hang out for a little bit. Mm-hmm. Now, the third C I mentioned is community. And there is something valuable about community. I'm still friends with all these guys I went to seminary with, that we spend time together. Community is incredibly important, but there are ways of figuring out community differently today. I think SMP gives us a little insight into how that community can be found. I think locally, as leaders are raised up in local contexts, new communities can be developed. We're just fearful because it's different.
Jeff, I wrote an article about this a while back, basically what the LCMS can learn from the military, and I'm glad you brought up a reference. So 80 to 85% of the officers that are raised up in the U.S. military are raised up through the ROTC program. And in collaboration with a sort of decentralized effort of receiving this experience across 1,700 universities. Mm-hmm. At the same time, they operate West Point and, the Naval Academy and these very prestigious residential institutions. So both things are going on at the same time. And they've developed a system. And this tradition in the military goes back to the 1800s, by the way. They've developed this system where sort of this residential prestigious institution is curating all of this really great content and then distributing it, right? Decentralizing it into multiple venues where a person can get that teaching.
Yeah.
And just imagine if the military had to staff all of its officers by sending every single person to a residential school at West Point. They couldn't logistically do it.
There's no way. There's no way it could happen. Not at all.
And this is the reality that we're in right now. And you
think about the nimbleness of the church. I mean, opportunities arise in a heartbeat. what wasn't there yesterday could be an opportunity today.
Right.
And if you have somebody that we can raise up in that role, in that place, and whatever that role may be, we need to be adept at equipping, educating, filling all the blanks to get that leader into that position to move it forward. Especially, as we talk about bivocational ministries, we talk about various ethnic ministries as they're unfolding and rapidly changing every day in the in our American context, to be sure.
Right. And not only that, these, people that are coming from, not going directly from college into a residential program, they've got this very diverse civilian experience, secular experience that really can enrich their experience as a pastor, right? They come in then stepping into that role with maybe a lot more real world experience, real world leadership experience, a lot more EQ, a lot more maturity in many cases. So I would even argue a lot of times, practically speaking, they could be even more equipped to step right into a pastoral leadership role.
Most certainly. It's funny. My son always said in his time in the Coast Guard, the very best officers he had were the ones that rose up from the ranks of the enlisted. Mm-hmm. He said they understood the people they were leading.
Right.
And man, oh man, I mean, that's been the strength of SMP. I've had a couple of, so I've tracked with this for years. Tim, you may not know this. Years ago, when I was serving in New York, we raised up a guy in our church, and he was in the last cohort of the predecessor to SMP, which was Delto, distance education leading to ordination. Right. I can play acronym soup. I can really do it in the Missouri Synod. But Delta was a great program. And I know of 3 pastors that are just killing it in situations where no one else would have gone. Mm-hmm. But they went through Delta and they're still there and they're doing a great job. Delta morphs into SMP. SMP, I think, has a better curriculum overall, but it's still a high ticket item. I don't think most realize if you go through SMP, we took our middle school teacher here. He's now my associate pastor, Michael Pop. And I said, I want you to do this. I believe God is calling you to do this. And his specific ministry, by the way, is our school. So about 75% of his time is with our school families. Ideally suited for this position. It's a $50,000 ticket. I mean, there's nothing cheap about this. Right. And at the end of the day, he's now, SMP they're in this gray zone. I would tell you they're not second-class citizens, but they're not really seen as fully on the roster, even though they are. They're in
among some in the LCMS, they would think of them as second-tier pastors, which is
which is insane,
problematic.
Because Michael is awesome. He is all of what a pastor ought to be, and then some. Right. I just love the guy and does amazing ministry that I couldn't do. I mean, he's got a different thing going on, especially in the heartbeat of our school. We know this is the case in other places. So streamlining, still quality of education. So, we talk about this. Content, control, and community are still the 3 big C's of all of this, but they're different ways of doing it. Yep. And we got to get our heads out of the boxes that we're all stuck in with this thing. I think what you guys are doing, with your United Leadership Collective is great. I mean, this is what we need to think creatively. And I do believe people at the 2 seminaries want to think creatively. We've got to remove the obstacles so they can be the theologians who bring about some of these things to the church that's going to grow the kingdom.
Yep. Tonight is dinner with 15 of our bivocational leaders, and they're all walking through competency-based theological education with Kairos. We've talked about it a lot. If you've been listening to us for any length of time, there are different ways, and there are more economically viable ways, especially as we go to lower income communities, to raise up indigenous leaders to bring the gospel. So some people may wonder, why in the world do we kind of harp on this? Why is this this is a major focus of my life, is exploring different ways to discover, develop, and deploy disciples of Jesus for vocational and bivocational work. Why? It's because our theology is so strong, Jeff.
Yeah.
And we really, our tension-filled law gospel theology is so strong that if we can have a more open hand as it relates to developing leaders, if we can say there are a number of different ways, and we're going to test, I really see on the other side, because this world is not coming together. Progress is not occurring as you look at the global trends and the United States of America trend. So what will be on the backside of a secular move is a groundswell of people who say, I'm spiritual and not religious, but I want to get to know this Jesus of Nazareth. He is for me. He loves me. He's changed the course of my life and the course of human history. And will there be people who are trained at the local level to bring the gospel to them? Evangelists and pastors and deacons and executive directors, all sorts of people saying, I understand the treasure which is our theology, and we are ready. And I really see, to close this chat, I really see the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, if we can have an open hand to exploring new models, really seeing us having a strategic opportunity to have another growth cycle into the future. Any closing comments on that, Jeff?
No, I absolutely agree with you, because the one of our strengths, it's kind of our Achilles heel, but a strength at the same time, is our theological education. It is something that is special across the spectrum of Christendom. It really and truly is. The education you receive, that I received, that pastors receive, it's phenomenal.
Yes.
And it can be better. It can be better. And it can be deployed in a different way to bless others, to grow the base of leaders, because we've got the tools. That's the thing that drives me crazy. We've got the tools, we've got the people, and it's like, well, no, we can't use it that way. Well, what do you mean we can't use it that way? It drives me nuts. That part really and truly does, because when we stumble into some good lanes of doing ministry differently, we need to not look at it with such great suspicion, but rather test it and say, why is this working so well?
Yeah, that's right.
Exactly.
That's right. So we should have more trust of our district presidents who are on the ground doing work in a variety of different contexts, and then running a variety of different tests. And not having to put it into constitution and bylaws and mandates, just run tests. And then every so often, we round back every 3 years, we get to report on what the test brought forward. So I'm praying that one of the tests we're running down here wants to be observed with curiosity rather than condemnation. And with the heart of churchly relationship. You can have a difference of opinion, but I took the exact same vows as you did, brother, and I'm not trying to compromise any of those values. I'm just trying to be faithful to bring the gospel to a very, very rapidly growing context here in the East Valley of Phoenix. So, all right, let's go to the local church, because that's really where the rubber hits the road. Last part of our conversation here.
Sure.
You are a numbers guy, Jeff. What numbers do you monitor to show growth and health that go far beyond just butts and budgets?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I was kind of considering that a little bit, what do we really do around here? So at Grace, one of the things we do is we look at the health of I'm going to start with the school and then move over to the church. But when we look at the school, we take a look at the numbers right away of who goes to what church, how many are church, can they name their pastor, et cetera. We put it all onto onto a chart. We get to take a look at it. And we realize that at Grace, 94% of our kids are not members of Grace Lutheran Church. And of that 94%, it's about 80% are not necessarily in a regular active worshiping community with their family. So we know that. So that's one of those things we know. So the first measurable that we really look at is baptisms. We really talk hard. Hard is not the right word. We talk a lot about baptism. And it's really
passion.
great. We go with vigor. We talk about it with vigor. And it's so cool when, the third grader or the second grader says to the parents who may have once upon a time been a Baptist somewhere along the line, says, I need to be baptized. And we baptize them. And one of the fun things here being in Jacksonville, I live about a half a mile from the beach. So the big thing here are beach baptisms, and Pop or I'll go out to the beach and, into the water we go, baptizing them in the ocean. It's just nice. A cool thing. So that's it for us. That's a real simple measurable. A second measurable is not just a butt in the pew, but how are they in turn now using their gifts of ministry by way of Christian stewardship? Where are they actively participating? Where are they plugging in? How are they leading? How are they extending the kingdom? Who are they inviting into a walk with Jesus with them? So for us, that really comes through in small group measurement. How many people in your small group are not members of our church? Because we want you to invite people who are not members of our church. Get them in your group. I mean, that's how they're gonna have a better encounter with Jesus there than showing up on a Sunday morning to a worship service, because they already have the kind of the familial relationship with the person. So that's one. A second one then is when a person comes to our ministry, identifies and aligns with the ministry, joins the ministry, how quickly are we getting them into some pathway of leadership? So a good example is recently we have a 23-year-old kid. He just graduated college. He's been bringing a friend of his for months. Next thing you know, I look up one Sunday, he's up in the sound booth, working in the sound booth with the other guy. He's there every week. Well, long story short, the 23-year-old member is now the youngest elder in our congregation. And his friend wants to know, what does he have to do to become an elder? It's like, well, maybe first join our church. That would be a good start. But seeing that movement of people and community, that to me is such a critical piece of this as we're going through. Numbers do matter. I mean, I do look at the numbers. We look at the worship numbers. COVID was a giant sucking sound in the church. It just was. And we're finally, it was last Sunday. Last Sunday, I looked at the numbers and I went, that was a Sunday morning worship number that we had in February of 20.
Wow.
Finally.
Awesome.
I mean, we've had good, we all know who's missing. We all know you can go look at Tom Rayner's stuff. He's done a lot of study on it, and is somewhere between 20 and 40%, depending on your church location and the like, that never came back or has gone from every Sunday to like once a month. But it's only been the last 6 weeks where I'm looking at the numbers going, this is almost pre-pandemic number now. And then last Sunday was an absolutely pre-pandemic number on the nose. So I'm always aware of kind of that cycle of where people are at, because it is important. It lets us know, what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? Who are we missing? How do we address it?
I like to tell people that numbers matter because numbers represent people and people matter. So, and that the best numbers always tell stories about people, right? What people are doing.
Yep, most certainly. Totally agree, Jack.
Yeah. So you teach strategic planning. We don't have a ton of time here, but if you were to give just some short tips about what you think are some of the errors that churches make in their strategic planning, what do you think those would be?
Number one, we create a mission statement that nobody can remember, nobody cares about, and nobody follows. So first and foremost, assess your situation. Take a good, honest look at yourself. Figure out where you are on the sigmoid curve. Lying about it doesn't help you. If you're on the rapid accelerating side of the curve to the bottom, admit it. It's okay. I mean, that's where you're at. So what do you need to do? What are some things that God has immediately put in front of you as your people? So we've done here at Grace some very strategic type of conversations where we've kind of codified our ministry around 4 key pillars of ministry. We're a learning ministry. Our church loves learning, so that's our first pillar. Loving is our second pillar. Most would have it reversed, but we understand our culture. We're a learning group, then we're a loving group. We're a serving group. We love to roll up our sleeves and help people. And we like to go places. We like to go do ministry. We have a very robust and active group that works in Tanzania. I've been doing work in Ethiopia. I'll be going to South Africa later on this summer in May to be the essayist at the Free Lutheran Synod of South Africa's convention. But what am I going to talk about? I'm going to be talking about how do we create that new curve. Don't over plan it. Be simple and create a plan that is nimble, that can be adjusted, that if something doesn't work, laugh about it, learn from what didn't work, move forward from it. A lot of these strategic planning processes are too cumbersome. They're just too heavy for the average church. Every church should be doing some type of strategic planning. When I taught the course, and this might help, I had the participants read through the book of Nehemiah. Just read Nehemiah. Show me God's strategic plan in Nehemiah. Well, shoot, you can do it in just about any book of the Bible, and you'll hear, there's, strategic planning is business. No, it's biblical. Creation is a strategic plan. Go follow God's strategic plan, So, really enjoy that. That's something the Fort Wayne Seminary just out of the blue asked me to do, and I love doing it now.
Cool.
Really cool.
Jeff, thanks for being with us today. Christ, Culture, and Cinema. You can find that podcast anywhere. I'm a Spotify guy. I don't know about you. That's where I listen to Jeff Skopak. Who's your co-host on that? Remind me his name. I forget.
It's Michael Pop. That's my associate.
Yes, Michael Pop, the associate. You guys get to hang out and do life and let us in on it. You are a wonderful gift to the church, Jeff. Thank you so much. If people want to connect with you, how can they do so?
Well, they can find us on Facebook at Pastor Jeffrey Skopak. That's one place they can find us. Certainly, just go on the web, Christ, Culture, and Cinema. We now have a blog spot there. You can find the the podcast as well. We're on every podcasting platform that's out there. So those are a couple of ways in which you can find us. And of course, you can find us at Grace Lutheran Church and School in Jacksonville, Florida.
Amen. Love it. This is Lead Time. Sharing is caring. Please like, subscribe, share, do all that stuff. Comments are helpful. We're going to be having wonderful guests coming up, just like Jeff, and some guests that are not exactly like Jeff. Those that have diverse opinions. We really believe we need to set up space right now to maybe disagree agreeably and find our common thread, which is the person and work of Jesus in a dark and dying world. We'll be back next week with another episode of Lead Time. Thanks so much, Jack, Jeff.
Peace.
Wonderful work.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Lead Time, a podcast of the Unite Leadership Collective. The ULC consults and brings together cohorts of congregations to build the culture, systems, and structures of intentional discipleship multiplication. To go deeper with us, create a free login on uniteleadership.org for access to exclusive materials and resources. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for next week's episode.